Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're going to be covering a number of topics. We're going to have a look at the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. We're going to look at the possible war between China and Taiwan. But I am back in Colorado. Gone the last several days. Obviously not making any content over those days. I was really out in the sticks, and connectivity was problematic for me at times. But not to worry, all back. Started our journey in New Orleans, and ended up in the Gulf Shores, Biloxi, Ocean Springs area of Mississippi. And let's see if I can find where I was at. And yeah, this area here, right on the Gulf Coast, and I won't identify the actual home, but that is where I was. Very, very enjoyable, very, very pleasant. You can still see the effects of Hurricane Katrina. A lot of the piers, as you observed from that brief video I showed, were destroyed. Now, I'm not sure if that was from Katrina or another storm that came in that wiped out that pier. But nonetheless, very enjoyable. I can tell you one thing that dawns on me when I go to some of these other states. Here in Colorado, if I go to a grocery store, very rarely can I get grocery bags. Here in Colorado, you have to bring your own grocery bags into the store. The left here in Colorado, this left-wing psychosis with things that make these lefties feel good, such as not having access to grocery bags. They think that's going to help the environment. Doesn't. Makes people actually sicker in terms of health issues. But when I go to Louisiana, Mississippi, other places, I can get grocery bags. And it reminds me of just how batshit crazy these lefties are in terms of their effects on your everyday life. And again, it's just such an ease to go into a store and bag your groceries with the convenience of grocery bags, plastic or paper, right there in front of you, and depart the store. Whereas where I'm at now, you have to plan. It's an annoyance. An annoyance that was created through no election process. No one here in Colorado voted on not being able to get grocery bags when you go to the grocery store. For my entire life, you walked into a grocery store and you could get grocery bags ready available to pack your groceries. So just one piece of information, especially when I leave town and go to other places, and the lifestyle, especially in Mississippi, very much slower pace than what you see where I currently reside. Got to tell you, New Orleans, tough town. That town is obviously is not doing well. Crime-ridden. You can feel it. Other than the French Quarter in some areas downtown where a lot of the tourists go is very nice. But outside of that, very dangerous place. Very, very dangerous place. And you can feel it. And definitely not someplace I would want to reside. Other places of Louisiana are very, very pleasant, very nice. But nonetheless, that's where I was over the last few days. So we'll get we'll now deviate from that aspect to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Not a lot has changed on the front lines. We continue to see this Russian strategy of fixing Ukrainian forces along the line of contact and then battering those Ukrainian forces into oblivion. Now, there's some intel coming out now that believes that the Ukrainian military is about 30 days from serious, serious problems, meaning the possibility of a general collapse of the Ukrainian military. And one of those reasons is lack of ammunition, lack of munitions. The Russians, over the course of the last 90 days, and even beyond that, have been focusing heavily on hitting Ukrainian supply depots. And this is artillery, this is anything and everything that supplies the Ukrainian war effort. And it has the West very concerned. It has the West very concerned. Supplies and material, especially ammunition, that is keeping this front line relatively static, is running out. And at the same time, the Russian military continues to expand, continues to become more powerful, larger, more experienced, day in and day out, and the Ukrainian military is now starting to wither at a greater pace than what was occurring in prior weeks and months from past. So, again, not a lot of changes on the ground. But that does not mean that heavy fighting is still not occurring. The front line is still very much active. The Russians are continuing limited ground operations against Ukrainian forces. But their main goal is, once they identify Ukrainian groupings, once they identify areas in which the Ukrainians have command and control points, supply depots, the Russians attack those points, those aim points. So that's what we're seeing, and we expect that will continue through the winter. We expect that the Russians will continue its ballistic and cruise missile campaign against Ukrainian forces throughout the winter. We understand that the ballistic missiles that the Russians are using are more effective, quite a bit more effective, than the cruise missiles the Russians are using. The Ukrainians are having more difficulty shooting down the Russian ballistic missiles. And we've also received reports now that North Korean ballistic missiles could also be used and are being used in this conflict. And we also believe that at a certain point we could see confirmation that Iranian ballistic missiles are also being used. Now, with those ballistic missiles, we continue to see the kamikaze drones. We're seeing new variations of those kamikaze drones, the geraniums, the Shahed drones that originated in Iran and are now being used and being produced by the Russians. The Russians are now producing more enhanced from a technological point of view kamikaze drone than what the Iranians had originally supplied. The Russians are starting to learn and understand how the Ukrainians are shooting some of these systems down. They're increasing their range. They're making them faster. They're decreasing their radar profile. So more difficult to shoot down and more effective in the ongoing war. So again, not a lot of changes along the front line, but make no mistake, the war continues. It is now a cruise missile war against command and control points, supply depots, and the Russians absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, have an advantage in that kind of conflict, especially a protracted conflict. And we'll have to see what happens as we get into spring and then summer. I believe that we could start to see even larger Russian military activity come spring and summer. But look, the Russians are in this for the long haul. This is not going to end in a year, and in all probability, this is not going to end in 2 years. And you have to look at whatever those Russian military objectives are, whatever the Russian war goal is. Obviously, it has not been completed, and we believe the Russians are going to continue to fight until that war goal or war aim is completed. Now, in other news, we are hearing reports that China could be speeding up its timeline for a possible military operation against Taiwan. Now, is this a blockade? Is this a full-on amphibious invasion of the island of Taiwan? Look, there are crucial elections coming up this weekend. I believe it's Saturday, the 13th, in Taiwan. And if the current party, the Democratic Progressive Party, I believe it's called, and then you have the KMT, if the current party remains in power, and this new candidate for president appears to be of the mind to declare full independence from China, an actual declaration. Now look, Taiwan is already independent from China. There is not two systems in one China. There is Taiwan and there is China. Taiwan has its own currency. It is a free nation, a relatively free nation, completely separate from the mainland. Now, there has been, over the past couple of years, there have been military exercises in China. And intelligence now believes that some of those Chinese military preparation exercises for an eventual military conflict with Taiwan were not very good. Meaning core competencies were not there. But compounding that is the corruption that exists in China. For instance, there are reports that within the strategic rocket forces, in the strategic rocket forces for China are going to be vital in attacking command and control and air bases throughout Taiwan if there is a conflict. Now, we have received reports that some of those missile systems were improperly fueled with the wrong type of fuel. There's even one report that water was used to fuel some of these surface-to-surface missiles. that the Chinese would use against Taiwan. Now, obviously, they have solid rocket fuel systems as well, but the big issue isn't really that issue in which you hear that report about the wrong fuel being loaded into the rocket. It is the core competencies of the Chinese forces that would have to launch an amphibious operation against Taiwan. Those forces appear to be undertrained, and based on those exercises that U.S. intel was able to observe through various means, the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army, is not even close to having the capacity to invade Taiwan, the capability, the skill sets to invade Taiwan. Look, this is not a small military operation. This would be essentially one of the largest amphibious military operations in history. It would be on par, and in all probability have to be larger than the actual invasions of Fortress Europe during D-Day, Normandy. And the Chinese, again, the core competencies of armored units, of infantry units, of special operations forces are not yet, the Chinese do not yet believe that their forces have those competencies to execute from the platoon level all the way up to division and corps level. That those competencies do not exist. And therefore, any prospect of an invasion would have to be pushed back, probably many years into the future. And that has led to the recent military purges that you are now seeing in China. The current leadership, the current power structure in Beijing is outraged that the military, that the People's Liberation Army, the ground forces, the strategic rocket forces, the air forces are simply not yet ready for a war against Taiwan, much less a war against the United States. Look, on paper, the People's Liberation Army looks impressive. They have thousands of fighter jets, thousands of ground attack, multi-role aircraft. That on paper appears that they would just simply completely overrun Taiwan. But the problem is there's a big difference between what a military looks like on paper and how it actually performs. And the United States has the resources to observe both human resources and technology-based resources, spy satellites, what have you, to observe how the Chinese are preparing for war. And we, the United States, can see that if China were to launch a military operation today, it would not go well for the Chinese. And again, this is all-encompassing. This isn't just one area of the Chinese military that is having challenges and serious challenges. This is all the way down to the platoon level in terms of basic infantry tactics, having the ability of non-commissioned officers to train and motivate new privates, all the way up again to brigade, division, corps commanders not fully having a grasp of multi-domain warfare and having an understanding of just how difficult this invasion of Taiwan would be. Even a blockade of Taiwan could prove incredibly difficult for the Chinese. Now look, if you look at what they have on paper, you would say the Chinese are going to win this with one hand tied behind their back. That's not the case. Their core competencies as a military force right now are still much lacking. Corruption has played a large part in that as well. So we here at MFAN don't believe we will see a military operation by China against Taiwan, at least within the next 5 years. They're going to have to get those core competencies up to a level where they have a reasonable amount of confidence that at the platoon, at the company, battalion level, that they can effectively fight and win a war. And we don't believe that China is there yet. And again, paper versus real life is much different. A lot of folks look at the U.S. Navy, they see a little rust on the outside of those naval vessels, and they think, well, the U.S. military is having issues. That it may, and part of that, just for that rust issue, is the environmentalist wackos that are in charge of the country right now, who are using the improper paint that causes some of that rust. That's why the Chinese aren't using that same paint. But the capability and the skill set of those sailors on those destroyers have a much higher competency than what we see from the Chinese. And I've talked about it before, the subsurface capability of the United States is really where the U.S. would win any conflict against the Chinese. The Chinese are behind, way behind, in terms of acoustic silence of the Chinese submarines versus U.S. submarines. The U.S. is way ahead of China in terms of both technology and, again, more importantly, that skill set of operating those systems with the right personnel. So that's where we sit today. We will continue to monitor and report. We appreciate everyone joining us today, obviously. And we will have more to come very, very soon. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.